Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namassami. So I'd like to offer my greetings to everyone and welcome everyone this evening. So, as some of you may know, in a couple days, I'm going to be going on a short trip, or a, maybe not so short trip, to Southeast Asia, and I'll be gone for a few months. And and so for me, this period here, being in Canada and meeting with Western Buddhists and teaching them, has been a really new experience for me. Basically, all my practice has been in Asia, in Thailand, a bit in a few other places, but mostly in Thailand and with Thai people, so people who were born Buddhist, raised Buddhist. So uh, so this experience of interacting with Western Buddhists who have, for the most part, come new to Buddhism has been really new for me. It's been a really positive experience. But one of the things you really notice is that regardless of, where you were born, how you were raised, if you're raised Buddhist or if you were raised, with a different belief or with no belief, the practice is the same, and it's the same for everybody. The Dhamma that the Buddhists taught, it's the same for everyone. So in our we when the Buddha spoke about the Dhamma, and he would give this stock phrases, because in a lot of the Buddhist suttas, there's these they use a lot of stock phrases, so these very repetitive phrases and these repetitive teachings, and so you just hear them again and again and again. And again, it's very helpful for us as monks when we have to chant a lot of this stuff, and that it's just the same thing, a lot of the same things chanted again. Don't have to do as much memorization. And in the back in the old days, back before the first few hundred years of Buddhism, the teachings weren't written down; they were memorized. So groups of monks would memorize sections of the teaching, and so we have a lot of these stock phrases, and it's really good too because there's mistakes don't slip in because the phrases are used again and again. So if a mistake slips in one place, you've got all the other places where it's correct, and they're able to correct it. And so when the Buddha would talk about the Dhamma, and we chant this, a few times a day as monks, he would describe the Dhamma, this reflection on the Dhamma, and he'd say, that the Dhamma is sanditiko, akaliko, ehipasiko, opanaiko, pachatang, veditabo vinyuhi. So it means sanditiko means it's apparent here and now. So one of the things about Dhamma, Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha, ultimate reality, the Buddha really emphasized that he didn't create Dhamma. This isn't like this unique creation of the Buddha. He says he discovered Dhamma because these are just universal laws, just universal principles of life. And so one of them is their sanditiko, they're apparent here and now. So when we're learning about Dhamma and we're practicing Dhamma, it's not about finding really abstract theories or about really going out to possible future things. All of it is, it's apparent here and now. It's about us, it's about our experience, it's about our minds, it's about our own dukkha, our own suffering, and getting rid of that suffering, and overcoming that suffering, and eventually being free from all types of suffering. And he also described it as a kaliko. which means timeless. So this is that the Buddha, the Dhamma is the same for everyone, no matter where they are and no matter what time they're in. So whether it was in the time of the Buddha, nowadays, or off in the future, the Dhamma is still going to be the same, and what we have to do to practice is still going to be the same. So in some, traditions within Buddhism, sometimes in Mahayana and certain traditions in within Theravada, the strange view has come up over the centuries of that, and not everywhere universal, but in certain places, this view has come up that we can't become enlightened anymore. That becoming enlightened, that was something around the time of the Buddha, and it's just not accessible to us anymore. And that's just simply not true. The Buddha said it's timeless. He never said that, okay, only people who actually meet me face to face can become enlightened. That's not what he said at all. So it is timeless. We can still practice. We can still become enlightened. We can still reduce our suffering and remove all of our suffering. Um, the Buddha also said that the Dhamma is ehipassiko, which means encouraging investigation. So, this isn't just something we take on and we're told once and we believe it and that's it. The Dhamma, it's something we have to investigate, we look into, we have to put our minds into it. It's not just accepting what's said, we investigate it. We look, we pick it apart and we investigate ourselves, which leads on to the next part. He said it's opanaiko, which means like leading inwards. Because again, when we come to practice Dhamma, when we start really practicing developing our minds, our meditation, this is leading us inwards. We're looking in at ourselves, our own experience, our own suffering, and removing that within our own minds. No one can come along and remove it for us. So as we practice, we're learning about ourselves and we're improving ourselves. And it's this internal thing. There was that one point where the Buddha said, like, the entire world exists within our fathom long body because our experience of the world, we all experience through our body. We experience it through our six senses. So we're not experiencing what's out there. It's an internal thing. So for example, if we go deaf, our ears stop working, there's no more sound anymore. It doesn't mean there's no sound outside. It means our experience of sound is gone because of something which has happened to our body. And the final thing the Buddha said is that the Dhammas pachatang vedita bo vinyuhi, so to be experienced individually by the wise. So again, this is that, it's an internal, it's a personal thing. When you become enlightened, when you experience Dhamma, it's something you do yourself and you experience yourself. No, it's not someone comes along and boom, makes us enlightened, zaps us with a magic laser or something and enlightens us. It's something we do ourselves through our practice. And that experience is we're going to experience it ourselves. So, so, this is just how the Buddha himself described the Dhamma when he was giving this reflection on the Dhamma. And so a lot of times, when we come new to Buddhism, or even when we've been practicing for a while, we're hearing all these different teachings, and sometimes it can get kind of like overwhelming, and you're like, oh well, there's this and that, what should I be doing? Or it feels like a lot. But it's good sometimes to just really come back to the really heart of Buddhism, like these really core teachings, these core foundations of Buddhism. And so in the first sermon, the first teaching the Buddha ever gave, it's called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So this is the turning of the wheel of Dhamma, or setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma. So this was when the Buddha, he met his old companions who he'd practiced with when he was an ascetic, and he taught them Dhamma, and he taught them the middle way, and then he taught them the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So I've heard lots of monks, they talk about it, that this first teaching about the Four Noble Truths, everything else afterwards is kind of commentary and on the Four Noble Truths. So all the other principles of Dhamma really fit into the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So sometimes, I feel it's good to just, reflect on these and refresh them a bit in our in our minds. So it starts off with the first noble truth, and it's that there is dukkha. So a lot of times we translate dukkha as suffering, but suffering is not really the best word for it because it's such a dukkha is such a spectrum. It's such a broad term. It can be all the ways from, horrible, painful, torturous suffering on one end to just kind of stress or discontent on the other end. So it's this really broad term. And this is, and this is, the Buddha. So instead of starting off with his teaching with some kind of really high, metaphysical or esoteric teaching, he starts off with this universal experience we all have in life, this experience of suffering. But none of us like it, right? Suffering, dukkha is not pleasant. So a lot of times we try to avoid it and stuff. But, the Buddha said, we have to understand suffering. And so, in some places they can, when they get into their explanations of dukkha, it can be, quite long, especially some certain traditions where they have really strong studying and they get into all these lists and it can get quite complicated. But again, when the Buddha talked about it, he talked about it in very simple terms. He said, you know, birth, aging, sickness, death, these are all suffering. He said sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair. This is dukkha, this is suffering. He said uh, not getting what we want is suffering. Getting the things we don't want is suffering. Being separated from the things that we do like is suffering. And so he really broke it down into fairly simple terms and of this experience for us to look at and really see the suffering we have. But then he moves on to the second noble truth, and he's looking at the cause of suffering. So very similar to the way a doctor would do it. First they look at your symptoms, and then they start looking at, okay, what's the cause of your symptoms? So, our symptom is suffering. And the cause of our symptoms, the Buddha said, is tanha, or craving. And normally when we think of craving, we think of just wanting pleasurable things. But the Buddha actually broke it up into three different types of craving. So he said there's, craving for sensual pleasures, which is called kama tanha. And then he said there's bhava tanha, which is this craving to be, this, I want to be like this. I want things to be like this. And then another type of craving is the opposite of that. It's called vibhava tanha. So, craving for things not to be. So I don't want to be like this. I don't want things to be like this. And so he broke it down to really that this craving is, what's causing our suffering. This, our discontent is us wanting things to be a way they're not. And so, so you can really see it. So, for example, say all of a sudden you want something to eat, something to drink. Say you're walking down the street and you see a really nice bakery and they've got some really fancy cake in the window that you really like. And then boom, that craving for this cake comes up. And so you're having, this discontent, like, I'm not happy right now. I'm not contented right now. I need to go get, I have this craving for cake now, and I need to go get this cake. So you go get the cake, you eat it, and now you've allayed that craving. So you've satisfied it, but it's not a you've not permanently satisfied it. That craving will come back. And a lot of times, the more you indulge in it, the more it comes back. So you can see something with, say, really extreme examples, sometimes with certain, drugs and alcohol, they have to get more and more to get the same feeling, and it gets more extreme, and it just keeps building. It's like the law of diminishing returns. Um, and again, the craving, there's no end to craving, right? So it's like, like I always say, you're never going to have that piece of cake, and all of a sudden you've now quenched all your craving for cake. You eat that one piece of really good cake and you're like, That was good. I'm done. I never want cake again. My cake cravings are gone. It's not like that. You want a nicer piece or you want another piece like that. It's the story I like to tell was there was this one from Luang Por Cha when he was practicing. So because Luang Por Chah, he had one of the things he's really known for is his wisdom. And so in his practice, he did a lot of like trial and error, really testing out these different teachings and these different things which were the Buddha said or his teachers had said to see if they're true or to really understand them. So when it came to craving, Luang Por Chah really liked mangoes. So he decided to see if he could quench that craving of mangoes by eating mangoes. So he sat down and ate as many mangoes as he could. And I forget the number. I've heard like it was like 38 or like 70 something mangoes he ate. And if you've ever seen Thai mangoes, they're good sized. And he would be eating them and he'd get to the point he'd vomit and then he'd just keep eating and eating. Um, and it didn't work. It didn't quench his craving for mangoes. I'm sure for the next few days he probably didn't want to see another mango, but after that, the craving for mangoes came back. So he's like, okay, yeah, indulging craving, that's not the way to overcome craving, which leads on to the third noble truth is the cessation of craving, the cessation of suffering. It's called Nirodha. And so when I was a layman, I'd read a book by a lay teacher in America. I forget his name, but he he interpreted the third noble truth to be hope. Saying there because it says there is an end to suffering. So he was saying this is hope for the end of suffering. But he actually was missing a really important part in that because it's not just saying there is hope, there is an end to suffering. The Buddha says that, but he also in the third noble truth tells us how to end suffering. He says, or how to end craving. He says you have to end suffering by giving up craving, by abandoning craving. And so it's not just hope. There's actually like a practical thing to do in there. He tells you what to do. And then which leads on to the fourth noble truth, which is the noble eightfold path. So this is what we've got to do to get rid of that craving, to overcome our suffering. Um, so again, it's eight factors of the path he taught. And the first one he started with right view. And so in different places, they explains different types of right view. So, in some places they talk about mundane right view or like more like a worldly right view. And so this is the Buddha was saying, there is what's given, there is these offerings, there's the merit of giving offerings. There's results of our good and bad actions. He says there is this world, there is the next. He said there is mother, there is father, there are these beings who are reborn. There are people in this world, recluses and monks and hermits that have actually realized for themselves with direct knowledge this world and the next. So like they really have understood and became enlightened. So all of these things are basically based around the idea of karma, of actions, our actions and results of our actions. But then you get to more like ultimate right view and the right view that when we, especially in our chants, when we chant the Eightfold Path, the right view is that seeing things and having the view of the Four Noble Truths, seeing things in terms of, suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. And when we do have right view, because it does start off as the first of the Eightfold Path, it's going to really affect the way, we relate to the other factors of the path, and really help us with the other factors of the path. Because, and so then moving on is to the second factor, which is right intention. And I think this one is one which really needs a lot of attention. I think needs a lot of intention, and I think sometimes doesn't get enough attention. And so this is the factor of intention, right? Intention. And so this is having the intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will, the intention of, it's usually a lot of times we translate intention of non-cruelty, but the word actually comes from the word ahimsa. the root word for it is hingsa, so it's actually like non-harming. So so this intention, renunciation, non-ill will, and non-harming. And I think to really get these intentions, obviously we have to uh, put effort into start developing these right intentions. But I think we really need to have a lot of honesty with ourselves. A lot of what's called sacha barmi, because a lot of times it can be really difficult to know our intentions, or sometimes we kind of, like to delude ourselves or lie to ourselves about our intentions. So, sometimes like, in your life, you say something to someone else, you point out something they do wrong, and you're telling yourself, yeah, I'm doing it to help them, but it's no, I kind of wanted to hurt them, or I wanted to put them down, or, it's like those people in life, those, I just tell it how it is. I just tell the truth. And it's like, nah, but their real intention is they kind of like saying mean things, or they want to be a little edgy, or in other interactions you have with people, it's like, you know, uh, at work, maybe you telling someone for doing something wrong. You tell yourself, well, actually, my intention is I want to help or help the business, but you're like, no, I just kind of actually really, I just kind of don't like that guy. So I've been looking to get him for a while. So I think this is one we really have to be honest with ourselves with our intentions. And then the next factor of the path is right speech. And I think this is really, really important. Like, so, the Buddhist path of practice, and, there's 8 factors, and he gives a whole factor to right speech. And, it's, when you're kids, you hear that little rhyme, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And but it's not true at all. Names can be words and speech and name calling, stuff like that can be incredibly hurtful. And the scars of our speech can last a lot longer than the than what you'd get from the sticks and the stones. So it is good to really work on developing our right speech. So right speech covers, avoiding false speech, so not lying, avoiding malicious speech, avoiding harsh speech, and avoiding like idle chatter or gossip. And so yeah, really, really working on that and working on developing our right speech as, a factor of the path. And so, when we are so even in life, when we feel that, we don't really have time to practice, if we're busy and we don't have time to sit and do formal meditation, we can always remind ourselves, if we're practicing right speech, we are actually practicing part of, 1/8 or one of the whole factors of the path to enlightenment. And you give ourselves like a little pat on the back. Okay, well, I'm doing right speech. I am practicing. And then the next factor is right action. So this covers to abstain from killing living beings, to abstain from taking what is not given, so not stealing, and to abstain from sexual misconduct. So these are, 3 of the 5 precepts we take. And so these, so yeah, so these ones, a lot of times they're a lot easier to do for most people than, say, the speech, or the even easier than like working with our mind, because it's much easier to control the body and not do these things. And then the next factor of the path is right livelihood. And so a lot of times, like, you'll hear, you'll read in the suttas or in our chanting, it'll be like, right livelihood, and it'll describe it as abstaining from wrong livelihood. And it's like, wow, that doesn't get into so much detail there, eh? And but there is a place where the Buddha did actually give, 5 types of wrong livelihood. And he said it was, trading in weapons, trading in living beings, trading in meat, trading in intoxicants, and trading in poisons. But we can really expand that, so that's the way the Buddha did. But we can really expand that, be like, right livelihood is, doing livelihood that isn't going to be harming other people. Because, certain careers, certain businesses, really, thrive on harming other people, or encouraging people to harm themselves. So this would be right livelihood. So those last three factors, right speech, right action, right livelihood, this is what we talk about when we talk about sila or talk about our morality. So it's all about our actions of body and speech. You know, mind isn't covered in morality because it's so much more difficult to control, and so that's addressed differently. So our sila or morality are just really those factors, what we do by body and speech, and then the next factor is what's called right effort. Um, and so this, we do it a lot while we meditate, and we do it a lot in our daily life. And a lot of the teachings I give are about this right effort. So it's described in terms of four factors. So one is trying to prevent the arising of unarisen, evil, and wholesome states. So this is trying to prevent, unwholesome mind states from arising. Trying to prevent these negative, unwholesome ways of thinking, mind states. And then the next factor is trying to abandon and get rid of the ones once they've already came. So the first one is you want to prevent, bad mind states from coming up. And then the next one is you want to get rid of those ones that have already come up and, cut them out, get them out. And then the next one is we want to bring up positive and wholesome mind states. And so actively, encouraging these, so this can be bringing mindfulness. Mindfulness is a wholesome state, or, loving kindness, or, reflecting on Dhamma, or any of these really wholesome states, actively bringing them into our mind. And then the fourth and final part of right effort is that, those once you have those wholesome mind states in your mind, is trying to continue them and strengthen them and increase them and just keep them going in your mind. And so a lot of times, a lot of the teachings like I give are about this, ways to deal with the mind and deal with these unwholesome mind states there. Um, and so the next factor, the seventh factor, is right mindfulness. And so this is what when it's described as the four foundations of mindfulness. So these four bases that we have mindfulness. So this is the body, feelings, mind, and Dhamma, which sometimes is translated as mind objects. And in when we chant the uh, eightfold noble path, the noble eightfold path. Sorry, we say like seeing the body as body, seeing feelings as feelings, seeing the mind as mind, and seeing mind objects as mind objects. And so, the last and final factor of the path is right concentration. And so this is actual like our meditative states, like the concentration, the samadhi we develop in our meditation, and really taking it to that deeper level, that higher level. And so this is developing the four jhanas, the first four jhanas. So there's the Buddha taught 8 jhanas, and actually he teaches also a ninth jhana, but we don't have to worry about those. This is just about the first four, and developing these is what really gives our mind that strength and that power to really cut deep and cut through our wrong views and cut through our mental defilements and really be that power to cut them out. So sometimes there's these schools which have come up in Buddhism, which say, actually, you don't need samadhi, you don't need concentration. All you need is insight. All you need is vipassana, and that's actually not the way the Buddha taught it. He did, again, one whole factor of the Eightfold Path is right concentration. And I had this friend, he was a Canadian monk, and he had been translating for this very senior, very respected Ajahn in Thailand. And this lady came, and I think she was from Singapore. He was telling me the story, and she was saying, is it okay if I don't have samadhi, I don't have concentration, but I can stay mindful and have continuous mindfulness going all the time? And this senior monk answered her, he's like, well, if you could have your mindfulness going all the time, you will have samadhi. If you can have continuous mindfulness, you'll have jhanas. And so yeah, so these are really like the core, the heart of the teachings of the Buddha and this our Buddhist practice. But it's really good, especially with the Eightfold Path, to really remember that, because the way it's presented, their first one, first factor, second factor, third factor. Sometimes we think of them as kind of like stairs or like rungs on a ladder. We do one, then we move on to the next one, and we move on to the next one. And it's not like that. What we have to do is we practice these all at once. We're practicing all eight factors together. And then as our practice develops, they're really going to start helping each other and feeding into each other. So, uh, the more you have right view, the more you want to practice your morality, your sila, have right speech, right action. And the more you do those, the better your meditation's going to be, the better your mindfulness. The better your mindfulness is, the better your samadhi will be. The better your samadhi will be, the better your mindfulness will be. And as your mind's getting more calmed down and more peaceful, it's going to be much easier to um, uh, have right speech, have right actions. You're not going to be wanting to go out and do that kind of unwholesome things. So so this is, it's good to remember just that sometimes when, we're hearing a lot of Dhamma, it can really seem, up in the air, so much stuff going on. But just to remember that, this is kind of, that it does have this core, it's kind of like back to the basics, back to these fundamental principles of Dhamma. So I thought I'd offer that as a bit of reflection for everyone this evening.